We'll hear from our presenter on Ed TPA.
Thank you.
Welcome.
Thank you all for having me here today. I appreciate the opportunity to talk with you about Ed TPA. My name is Lori Kroger. I am the director of Ed TPA at Evaluation Systems with Pearson. We are the operational partner that operationalizes Ed TPA nationally. So earlier, you've heard about Cal TPA, which is the commission's assessment, very specific and only used in California. You've heard about FAST, the Fresno State model, which is from Fresno State and used by Fresno State candidates and their faculty. Ed TPA is a nationally available performance assessment. So there are some differences. I'll try to point those out to you and walk through some things. There are some similarities as well. And again, I'll try to point all those out to you. I know I get you all right after lunch. So I'll take the opportunity just to remind you that you have candy in front of you. Just in case. So, feel free to ask questions. I'm happy to do that. In addition, or prior, I should say, to being the director of Ed TPA for evaluation systems, I've been a kindergarten classroom teacher. We won't talk about how old those kids are now. I'll keep that confidential, but they're all of working age now. But I was a kindergarten classroom teacher. I was also a faculty member, an Ed TPA coordinator, and an assistant dean in different ed prep programs across the country, Wisconsin, New Jersey. So a little bit about me. I've been working with Ed TPA in one way or another since its operational launch nationally in 2013. I'm so happy to answer questions and provide any answers that you need. Again, I'll be doing kind of the same things that my colleagues have gone before me today and talked about, and we'll start with a model overview. And again, you're going to see some similarities, but also some differences as well. So Ed TPA, as a teacher performance assessment, provides a measure of candidates' readiness to teach that informs both program completion and credentialing decisions, while at the same time supporting candidate learning and preparation program growth and renewal. When it was developed, it was modeled after the National Board for Professional Teaching Standards Assessment. So if you are familiar, if you're an NBCT yourself, first, congratulations, that's quite an accomplishment. But if you're familiar with the NBCT process, you'll also see some similarities with this assessment as well. Ed TPA was designed by the profession for the profession. So you heard Amy earlier today talking about a design team, and that was very specific to California. There were California educators. Ed TPA was designed by the profession for the profession with educators from across the country, including over 430 ed prep programs. All of these folks participated in an extensive multi-year process that included designing the assessment, reviewing iterations of it, piloting it, and participating in field tests. The design and review team members, included university and IHE faculty and staff, P12 teachers, and then representatives from national subject matter organizations as well. Ed TPA's design, when it was designed and continues to be the purpose for it today, is to strengthen beginning teachers and teacher education, to inform credentialing in combination with other state and program requirements, to provide actionable evidence that can guide program improvement, to strengthen the information that supports accreditation and program evaluation, to guide and support the induction of new teachers, and improve P12 student outcomes through candidates' demonstration of their readiness and their ability to effectively teach the subject matter to their students. Ed TPA consists of, we have 30 separate handbooks. We call them handbooks. They're guides. If you're Cal TPA, it would be a guidebook. It's very similar. California has adopted and approved 18 of those that align to very specific credentials. So certain credentials have a certain content-specific or discipline-specific handbook. The assessment examines authentic evidence that candidates put together and submit from their clinical practice. So from student teaching in their experiences in the classroom. These sources of evidence, what they're submitting, include lesson plans, instructional materials, student work, feedback to their students. They're providing evidence of feedback to their students to guide their students' learning, and then video recordings of their instruction as well. Through the EdTPA process, candidates are asked to identify and collect, again, that subject-specific evidence of effective teaching from a learning segment that they choose. So the way that the handbooks and the requirements are designed, candidates have what we call a central focus. That's kind of the big idea of their lesson. They are free then to teach any lesson that fits within that. So for example, in secondary ELA, it's composition or comprehension. So anything that would fall under comprehension or composition would fall into that central focus. So they plan 3 to 5 lessons. Those lessons can be taught to the whole group. They can be taught to a small group of students within that class. So if they want to teach their whole class, that's fine. If they just want to teach one particular group of students, they're welcome to do that as well. The lessons come from a unit of study. There is no required lesson plan template. The candidates are free to use whatever lesson plan template their placement, their school, or their EPP requires. And then they provide commentaries. And those commentaries, along with the artifacts, the lesson plans and the student assessment work and the feedback, those commentaries provide the candidate the option or the opportunity, rather, to provide the rationale for their teaching decisions, why they did the things that they did, what went well. Those of us who've been teachers, we know sometimes we plan lessons and we think on paper it looks like it's great. We get in front of our students and it doesn't hit quite the way we thought it would. And so they have an opportunity to reflect on that as well. So I've shared this as sort of our diagram. This is our image that we use of EdTPA sort of all the time. You'll see that everything about the assessment is centered on and for student learning. So everything that a candidate is doing is really coming back to, what do you know about your students' learning? In the circles that you see around student learning, you see planning, instruction, and assessment. Those are the 3 tasks of EdTPA. We call them tasks. And I'll use this as an opportunity to point out another difference that you'll come to understand between CalTPA and EdTPA. Where CalTPA is currently 2 cycles, EdTPA is 1 submission. So it's completed at one time. Everything is submitted and scored at one time. So these 3 tasks, as the assessment is currently designed, are all submitted at the same time, but you can see planning, instruction, and assessment. Planning is just that. It's the intended teaching. What do you know about your students? What do you know about their assets, their prior learning, where they are now, what they might struggle with, what you anticipate them struggling with in this lesson, what supports are you providing them, how will you assess their knowledge? So all of that is part of task 1. Task 2 is the enacted teaching, the instruction task. This is where we see evidence from the video clips of the teaching, looking at how are the candidates, how is the candidate deepening their student learning? How are they engaging their students in active learning? How are they moving them further and deeper into the knowledge that they're sharing and teaching their students? If a candidate has planned a lesson or a series of lessons and get there and they're like, gosh, I really thought they were further along, or they were further along than what I thought. There's no need to go back and rewrite those task 1 lesson plans or any of task 1 commentaries. The candidate has an opportunity within task 2 to reflect on that and to simply share, I planned my lessons based on what I knew, but when I got there, I actually realized this. And so I did whatever it is that they did differently. So although the instruction task comes after that, they're not penalized for saying, you know what, we weren't quite where I thought we would be, and I needed to go and reteach something or revisit a prerequisite skill. So they absolutely have the opportunity to do that. The assessment task is the third task. This task asks candidates to analyze not just whole class learning and patterns of learning from all of the students in their class or that small group that they selected for their TPA, but they also select 3 focus learners. So they are selecting students. One of them must have a specific learning need. One of them must be an English learner. And again, just like we heard earlier, if there is no English learner in the class, there's other options for who that candidate can select. And then, so those are the 2 requirements for their focus learner. Their third focus learner can be someone else in the class. Within their Ed TPA, however, they are also required to support a student who comes from an underrepresented group or a group that needs to be served differently. So that requirement is also met within Ed TPA. So back to assessment, they're assessing their whole class learning. What do I know about my effectiveness in terms of teaching based on what my students learned and could demonstrate on the assessment? They're also deeply analyzing the learning of those 3 focus students. So they have the opportunity to really dig deep into the data and what they know about their students, those 3 focus learners. You can see kind of woven throughout the 3 tasks. So on the outside of those 3 globes, or in between those 3 globes, you can see the words academic language, and then justifying planning decisions, analyzing teaching, and using data to inform instruction. Those are really woven throughout the 3 tasks of Ed TPA. They're not isolated into any one task, but they're really the thread that sort of connects them together. So academic language is the language of the discipline. What do students need to know in order to be successful learning the content that you're teaching today? What do they need in order to be able to engage and connect with the curriculum? So they're planning for that. They're actually also using it then when they're teaching, right? That should be seen as evidence that the teacher candidate is using academic language as they are instructing. And then they're assessing students' knowledge, the students' understanding of the content, as well as students' use of academic language in that third task. So that's kind of how it's woven throughout the 3. Planning decisions, analyzing teaching, and using data to inform teaching are all components of effective teaching practice. And so those also are woven through. Candidates are asked to justify their planning decisions on several different metrics. So what do you know about your students' prior learning? What do you know about your students' current learning? What do you know that they might struggle with? What are their assets? But then also, what do you know from theory and research, right? I used to tell my candidates all the time, they'd kind of look at me like theory and research. And we know that excellent teachers don't do what they do because it's quick or easy or looks good when an administrator walks by, but it's because we're using best practice that's grounded in theory and research. And that's really what this is asking them to do, is just identify that best practice. Why did you know that this particular strategy was the best way to teach this content to this group of kiddos? So that's what that is. Analyzing teaching, they actually have an opportunity to do this multiple times where they're asked to analyze their teaching effectiveness. Again, not on how they think they did, but on how their students learned and what their students were able to demonstrate. And then using data to inform instruction. This is where they are asked again from that analysis of both whole class learning and their focus learner learning. To really think deeply about what does that data tell them and what might they change or do differently in the future to avoid that. So if there was a common misconception and they were teaching and there was a common misconception that multiple students kind of fell into, right, they misunderstood something, the candidate might say, that's an opportunity for me next time to front load that, right? To front load what that common misconception is and help to prevent that in the future. So this is the Ed TPA model. Again, 3 tasks: planning, instruction, and assessment. I listed this. I won't go through all of this with you, but you can see the 3 tasks on the far left column, The artifacts that we've talked about are in the middle. So again, lesson plans, instructional material, student assignments, assessments, video recordings, student work, evidence of feedback. And then again, those planning commentaries, or the three commentaries as well. The rubrics are over on the right-hand side. The first 5 are in the planning task. The second set of 5, so 6 through 10, are the instruction rubrics. They are in the instruction task. And then 11 through 15 are in the assessment task. I did not put this in here. We only have a short amount of time. So I will just say this. Some of you who use EdTPA might be thinking, what about those other 3 rubrics? And I heard someone earlier say, what do you mean EdTPA has 4 tasks? And because they hadn't been familiar with that. So the multiple subjects field, the 2 handbooks right now that are approved for multiple subjects, does have a 4th task. It's 3 additional rubrics. It's a smaller task, but it does address the first 3 tasks address either literacy or math. And then the 4th task is the opposite field. So in case you're familiar with EdTPA and you're like, where are those other 3 rubrics, Lori? This is the bulk of our handbooks. So I started with this. I'm happy to answer questions about that 4th task if you have it. So that's a little bit about the model and the overview, just kind of how we are similar to, but also different from the other models that you've heard from today. I'll talk a little bit about how EdTPA is formative in nature and how it can be used both by candidates and by programs in a formative way. So as a formative assessment, EdTPA, we certainly encourage programs to embed multiple learning experiences across their prep program. We have lots of resources, over 70 at this count, to provide EPPs and their candidates with ways to learn about EdTPA, ways to look at EdTPA, and really unpack the assessment so that as they're working through it, they're not learning about it for the first time when they get to student teaching and they're opening that handbook and they're looking at it and they're saying, oh my gosh, this is overwhelming, but really ways that we can unpack that. So some of those resources that we have, again, we have handbooks, we have other documents as well. We have webinar recordings for EPPs. We also have candidate support webinars. During COVID, we recognized that with EPPs being closed, with K-12 schools being closed, that candidates needed an additional layer of support. And at the time, we were facilitating live webinars for candidates. What we did was we took an opportunity to record those, and we recorded them in sort of bite-sized chunks. So I think someone else, maybe it was Amy, that said earlier today, nobody wants to read a 75-page how-to manual for how to take a test. They want it in smaller pieces. And so they want it in kind of bite-sized chunks. And so that's what these candidate webinars are. We've recorded a short, less than 10-minute webinar for each of the tasks, as well as an overview to EdTPA. So candidates have an overview that they can watch that sort of introduces them to the assessment, to the major requirements, things they need to know and be able to know how to do. But then we actually walk them through the requirements of each task one by one by one. So we have those, and they are public facing. They're on edtpa.com. They do not require a registration or payment. They are out there for anybody to view. So we have those as well. The rubrics themselves are also formative. So the rubrics show kind of an expanding repertoire of knowledge, skills, and abilities that are very closely aligned to effective teaching. Our 5-level rubrics range from not quite ready on that construct, not quite ready to teach, but not quite ready on that particular construct, all the way to advanced evidence of advanced practice for a beginning teacher. So I'm going to show you kind of our rubrics, and you can see that progression as well. So what does this look like? At level 1, that's the not ready on that construct. You see a candidate, the evidence that they're submitting is someone who is very teacher focused. whole class focused. They're delivering instruction really with their whole class in mind. And the lessons, the planning, the delivery of the instruction is fragmented. It's indiscriminate. It doesn't flow smoothly. All the way to that other end at the 5, where this is really evidence of someone who's highly accomplished. They're very student focused. So their planning, their instruction, even their assessment is designed with specific students in mind and to meet specific student needs. When they're planning and delivering instruction and even assessing students, they're doing so with individual students or small groups of students in mind. So they're really thinking about who the kiddos are in front of them, what their needs are, what their strengths are, and designing supports to make sure that the kiddos who need that support have that. And then, of course, the kiddos who need to be, kind of driven deeper into the content and being challenged are receiving that as well. Their plans, their instruction is, again, it's intentional, it's well executed, it flows very smoothly. So that's what the kind of the natural progression of the rubrics looks like. I leave this here so that you can see a 3 it represents the knowledge and skills of a candidate who's qualified to teach. So that middle row is really where we used to say, Amy said something today, and I can't remember exactly what she said, but it reminded me, we used to tell our candidates, you live at 3s, right? That's where you're aiming, is at that 3. And then you kind of visit those 4s and 5s. They're, it's meant to be developmentally progressive, that you're at that 3 to show proficiency and readiness to teach. Let me say one more thing about the rubrics as well. All of the materials are available to candidates as soon as they register. Their registration is valid for 18 months. So they have 18 months in time to submit their portfolio for scoring. Faculty have access all the time to EdTPA materials. We have a resource library on edtpa.org. It does require a login, but any faculty member or staff member at an EPP using EdTPA is certainly welcome to have access to those materials. Then they are able to share those materials out with their candidates at any point in time. So if they wanted to share rubrics or prompts or anything else, they're welcome to do that at any point in the program. For sure. Another way that EdTPA can be used formatively is through our faculty feedback tool. So this is built within the Pearson ePortfolio system. That's the system that candidates are submitting their materials to. Candidates can upload their materials. They can select from a list of approved faculty and staff and ask for review and commentary or comment on their materials prior to submission. We, like the CalTPA program, also have a very robust list of acceptable supports. I tell people the acceptable list is very long and the not acceptable list is 4 items, right? It's, don't upload your candidate work, don't give them the correct answer, don't tell them what video clip to use, things like that. So lots of opportunities for EPP faculty and staff to give support to their candidates as they're working on their materials. I will say that the faculty feedback tool is, I think, underutilized. It's not something that is widely used. We try to talk about it a lot and promote it. I also understand, having been a faculty member and a TPA coordinator and assistant dean, that requires a lot of thinking and planning on the part of faculty and staff to be able to provide that support. But it is there for any program that would like to use that. We also have what is called a professional growth plan. I really wish more folks would make use of this. It's a really great tool. The professional growth plan helps candidates as they are exiting their initial program to think about not only their EdTPA results, but also other sources of evidence from cooperating teachers, from their university supervisor, from other tests, other assessments that they've had to complete, whether they are required by the state or if they are simply EPP required assessments. What they have an opportunity on this growth plan to do is document their strengths and their needs as they're exiting their initial program and walking into induction. And it really can be used to inform, what do I need? Where am I right now? And what do I still need? We're all continuous learners, right? We're lifelong learners. And so helping candidates as they're leaving their program really begin thinking about, what is it that I'm still working on as an educator? Formative for EPPs, we've heard today about Ed Reports and Results Analyzer. Ed Reports is where designated faculty and staff at EPPs can go in and get the raw data scores. So every score reporting cycle, that's every 3 weeks from submission deadlines, scores are reported. Faculty, staff, whoever the score report recipient is, can go into Ed Reports and pull down raw data files that have all of the rubric scores, the task scores, the cumulative scores, all kinds of information. And then Results Analyzer is a very powerful tool. It's a data analysis tool that we have that allows EPPs to run customized reports that can be disaggregated by a number of candidate variables: race, ethnicity, gender, but also placement variables. So were they in a rural setting? Were our candidates in an urban setting? They can look at lots of different placement variables as well and run customized reports. My team and I also facilitate 4 times a year, so twice a semester, if you will. We facilitate coordinator checkpoint meetings where we gather with our Ed TPA coordinators, share any updates, any information, answer questions that have bubbled up since we've talked. We're available, obviously, all the time as well, but we definitely pull folks together. And we try usually in the spring. We generally do a results analyzer demo each spring. We also do them upon request. So if there are EPPs who are working on accreditation documentation, like, gosh, we haven't been in RA for a long time, we need to get in there and be able to run some reports. Someone from my team is happy to connect with them and do that as well. The secondary passing standard, so this was also referenced earlier today. In December 2023, the Commission adopted the secondary passing standard, allowing EPPs to recommend candidates for their preliminary teaching credential if they have met all other credentialing requirements and have demonstrated competencies across the TPEs. So we've also supported we've supported EPPs in understanding the Commission's guidance with that, providing information and direction on that. I included in this just potentials for modification. I think it's important to recognize that there's always room for growth and change. One of the things that we are very excited to begin working on is what I call a modular submission model, where candidates can submit one task at a time and then get feedback, receive scores, and then giving them that opportunity to think about that and integrate feedback into future submissions. So that's something that we're discussing. We look forward to that as an opportunity of things to bring to the field in the next several years. So in terms of Ed TPA and its relationship to being a valid and authentic work to the work of teaching, initial content validity studies consisted of gathering feedback from educators to rate the importance, alignment, and representativeness of the essential knowledge, skills, and abilities required on each rubric, and really the alignment of those to the necessary components of effective teaching. That initial, sorry, I flipped ahead one slide too many. That initial content validity provided critical evidence that the content of the assessments of the handbooks were related to the knowledge, skills, and abilities necessary to the job of teaching. In terms of scoring, Ed TPA scorers are P12 educators. They're teacher educators. I'll put in a plug too. We're always looking for scorers. So if you're interested, you let me know. But all of the scorers for Ed TPA are P12 educators or teacher educators with experience in the subject matter. So again, because we have 30 separate handbooks, I was an early childhood teacher. If I was a scorer, I would not be scoring secondary math. I can assure you of that. I would be scoring early childhood portfolios, right? I'm not a scorer, but if I was, I would be. So it's very specific to the subject area. Even within the subject area, if, say, it was secondary science and someone said, I will happily score biology and life science and physical science, but I do not want to score chemistry. That's fine. Portfolios can be routed to people with precise expertise. They also must have relevant and recent teaching experience working with either teacher candidates or as a classroom teacher. At the inception, the creation of Ed TPA job analysis studies were conducted to focus on the knowledge, skills, and abilities necessary for successful teachers. And so this included practicing classroom teachers and teacher educators in the content field who were part of this. Essentially, what that job analysis study found was that the group of teachers, again, P12 and teacher educators, identified a list of 105 tasks or behaviors that are critical to teaching. 86 of those met or exceeded the threshold. So that panel of educators then was able to confirm that the 15 rubrics that had been developed were strongly related to the critical tasks and behaviors of teaching. So potential for modification to, again, making Ed TPA more aligned to the authentic work of teaching. I've listed two possibilities that, having, again, been with this assessment for more than a decade, really looking at academic language in a different light and looking at it more in the light of literacy across the discipline. It's not just elementary teachers that have a responsibility for ensuring that we're working with our students or with their students teaching literacy and literacy across and within that discipline. And so that's one possible area for modification. The other one is to ensure that culturally relevant teaching practices are demonstrated at the level of proficiency. They're not reserved for another level on the rubric, but that they are required at that level for proficiency. In terms of reasonableness to implement in a wide range of classroom settings, teacher candidates, again, they're developing lesson plans. They're engaging students in learning that is consistent with the school where they're teaching, with the missions, the standard, and the curricula that's being used. The 3 tasks of Ed TPA are naturally embedded into the work of teaching. They're authentic to the work that candidates are doing, planning, instructing, and assessing student learning. And candidates have the ability to tailor their teaching to their school context. I used to tell my students all the time, we don't make our placement fit into a teaching performance assessment. A teaching performance assessment should fit naturally into our placement. It should be what we're doing every day. Planning, writing lesson plans, creating assessments, teaching and assessing student learning and giving them feedback. So that's a little bit about the school context. Every once in a while we get asked about co-teaching and what does that look like? How do you complete Ed TPA if you're co-teaching or if you're working with a mentor teacher to plan lessons? And so, I've just kind of stated here that role of the supervising teacher, that mentor teacher, is really to model, mentor, and support candidates based on program expectations, right? That's really their role. Candidates, of course, benefit from some additional context, especially if it's early in the year. So it's September, October, about what do we know about, how can I get to know my students? What do I know about, what did they learn last year? Where are they kind of in the scope and sequence of the curriculum? But in terms of co-teaching specifically, candidates can absolutely submit materials and evidence that's developed or selected through a co-teaching activity. They just provide their own justification or rationale for why that's appropriate for their students. So a lot of districts now will use department level planning time where teachers are collaborating across different classrooms to co-plan. And so that's absolutely fits within what candidates are able to do. Another question that we have often is in classrooms where the district has selected a scripted curriculum or high quality instructional materials. And how do I do that? With EdTPA, candidates can absolutely use these materials when planning their lessons. They would just add any details to any of the prompts that might just explain why that curriculum is beneficial, providing some examples about how the materials and assessments have been adapted to meet those specific students. But we have lots of questions about this, and we remind people all the time, the changes can be very modest. It doesn't have to be, if that's what your district requires, then that's what they need to use. We also have a robust guidance and a lot of flexibility for completing EdTPA in what I'll call alternative classrooms or alternative settings. So during the pandemic, lots of folks were teaching virtually. And so we have comprehensive guidance on completing EdTPA in a virtual environment. I'm sometimes surprised by how many folks are still teaching virtually. And so we have comprehensive guidance for EPPs as well as candidates on how you can collect evidence in a virtual environment. We also have what we call alternative to video recording options. So we have 6 options for candidates who are in placements, maybe a mental health facility, a juvenile detention center, a hospital setting, just a district that has refuses to allow video recording in that particular classroom. We have a range of options. There's 6 options that include combinations of audio recordings, transcripts, or even observational notes. So lots of different options if they're in a different type of classroom. Again, I just sort of acknowledged here that the modular submission would allow candidates to complete tasks, perhaps in different classroom settings or at different points in time. Right now, EdTPA, all the tasks or all the evidence from EdTPA comes from those same 3 to 5 days. And a modular submission would allow them to collect some evidence, maybe at the onset of a placement, and then other evidence or additional evidence for the next submission a little bit later. In terms of its appropriateness for beginning teachers, I talked a little bit earlier, and there is, and I can provide this, Adam, I might not have provided this to you, but I can provide this for the group. There is a review of research on teacher education that provides extensive information about the conceptual and empirical rationale for the 3-task model, but also for the rubrics representation of the initial competencies needed to be ready to teach. So I'll make sure that I get that to Adam and you can add that. What? Is that the CAP pack? I think it is, yes. If it's not, I'm going to get that one too, though. That's another good one. Again, I showed you the rubrics, but the rubrics are progressive. They do align with evidence at that level 3, which is proficiency, that is ready to teach. But then again, formative in that there's the 1s and the 2s, and then the 4s and the 5s as well. So candidates, again, are preparing all of the evidence, and the artifacts that they're providing are authentic and job related. So we've talked about kind of what these are before, but there's lesson plans, instructional materials, assessments, assignments, video recording, all of the artifacts. There are, you see, I've meant the modular thing. You can tell I'm really a fan of the modular approach, right? You can tell I've been giving a lot of thought to that. I do think it's the right thing to do. But there is another modification that I've had here. using language that makes the assessment itself more accessible to candidates. I think there's an opportunity to do that with EdTPA. Not changing the requirements, not making it easier, but making it easier to navigate. Right now we have 4 or 5 different documents that candidates need to navigate in order to kind of have all of the details about EdTPA. We have a handbook and making good choices and an academic language handout and an understanding rubric level progressions, and a lot of things. And it can be kind of a challenge to organize that and think about, what do I look at when? We're actually this fall, so in June for EPPs, and then in August with candidates, we are releasing a new structure to the assessment where all of the materials that they need will be in one document. So it'll be a large document. I mean, the trade-off is you put everything in one place, or you have lots of different things that are smaller. But what we've heard from the field is candidates are struggling. They're challenged by figuring out what do I look at? Which document am I looking at for which thing? And so we're embedding it all into one. So we're also excited about that opportunity. But even beyond that, I think there is an opportunity to take out some redundancy in some of the materials and help candidates navigate just the assessment materials more easily. We'll talk about bias. I put eliminate in parentheses because I'm a big believer that we work toward eliminating, but I'm not sure that we ever eliminate bias. I think we recognize and actively take steps to reduce our biases all the time. I check myself. I know things that I kind of presume, right? And so I think we're working toward elimination, but I think really what we're doing is recognizing and reducing bias. And so I'll talk a little bit about how EdTPA works in terms of that and contributes to that. So I'll talk first about scorers. Again, I've already shared all of our scorers are K-12 or teacher educators. They all have recent experience in the field. They complete a very robust series of online training modules, and those modules include recognizing, acknowledging, and reducing implicit bias. So that's a big part of that. The total training modules that's mostly online, it's about 20 hours in total. Most of that is online. And then there's at the end an interactive group session where they're actually meeting with a scoring supervisor and other scorer trainees as well, other folks who want to be scorers, and they're working through some different exercises. They have calibration exercises before they're allowed to score. They score at least 2, sometimes 3 portfolios to ensure that they are calibrated and scoring according to the rubrics. And then they are also continuously monitored as well. So double scoring is how we can do the continued and ongoing calibration exercises. So 10% of all EdTPA portfolios are double shored to ensure consistency and reliability. If I am scorer 1 and you are scorer 2, you don't know that you are scorer 2, and I don't know that I am scorer 1. We aren't told that it's a calibration portfolio. It's completely blind. And then all portfolios that score just below the state passing standard are also double scored. So what that means is about 25% of all portfolios are double scored. Participant group scores. This was at the kind of initial development of EdTPA, looked at the average total scores across participant groups. No noticeable differences were found for gender or for candidates whose primary language is not English. Comparatively small differences were found among other participant groups, but important to note that there was greater variation of scores within the subgroups than there was across the subgroups. Annual administrative reports. Each year, we provide an annual administrative report that offers insight into performance broken down by lots of different variables. Some of them are demographic, others are related to placement. And then where appropriate, we do statistical analysis testing. So we do significance testing through ANOVAs and post hoc analyses that explore the differences between these groups. And again, the same thing. The greater variation is really seen within a subgroup and across subgroups. Opportunity. Oh, and let me say one more thing. I didn't put this in here and it dawned on me today. We also, even though we do an annual report, we also provide states. We provide the state client. We also provide each EPP with their data twice a year aggregated. So we provide biannual summary reports once at the end of each kind of what you would think of as a semester. So in February, that covers kind of what you might think of as the fall term. And then in August, that is the winter and spring term. What we do, we provide data for each EPP that is specific to them and their candidate to have submitted. And then everyone also gets national data so that they can see just where they kind of fall in terms of the nation. Opportunities for improvement. Since the inception of EdTPA, it has undergone several rounds of improvement. As a standard measure of practice, we are committed to continual improvement of the assessment. We're ready to work with the CTC to ensure that EdTPA remains a valid, reliable, formative, authentic, reasonable, and appropriate assessment. And I got done in that 5 minutes. I got a 5-minute warning. I saw it here and I got it over here. I was like, I got this. I'm done. So
we have the opportunity to pose questions to our presenter. Colin?
Yeah, it's a similar question to the one I asked the other presenters. When we look at the passing data, there seems to be a significant difference with Black students that are passing their first attempt at 77%, whereas the average is 87%. And even at the final all attempts, it's still 6% below. That's the first question. So there's a certain point that I really want. And then looking at the data around world languages, 64% pass at the first attempt, as again, much higher rate than most others. And I just wondered whether you're investigating that and to what extent that is in your improvement plan as it were.
yeah.
And it's a very worrying statistic.
I agree, Colin. Yes, absolutely. One of the things that as we begin to make changes to the assessment, we'll be working with candidates, we'll be working with EPPs, be working with other stakeholders to better understand the challenges that candidates are facing and understand why certain groups are performing lower. So absolutely, that's part of what we'll be doing for sure.
Other questions? Beverly?
Comments and 2 questions too. First, all this language takes me back because I was part of the first pack and then at TPA advisory a long time ago, but I remember slowly coming back. I too like your concept of the modular submission. I'm a little surprised that it's taken long TPA to get to that concept, and then it will be a couple more years because it seems to really enhance the concept of formative assessment, offer that option. I'm glad you're moving in that direction. The main thing that struck me though was in your opening and your list of purposes for EdTPA, you include informing licensure, which is what all 3 of the assessments I think are focused on, the decision about whether or not you get a credential. But your purposes also articulated, which I didn't hear in the other models. The purpose of it was to guide induction, which professional growth plan, which you said, is underutilized, but it's there. And for program improvement purpose, which I didn't hear from the others, which I think is a significantly important purpose. And you have the RA and the other tools. You also had as a purpose improve K-12 learning outcomes. And I wondered, first question, if you have any means of gathering evidence of whether or not EdTPA is achieving that.
So there are some studies, and I'll pass them along to Adam as well. There are some research studies about the predictive validity of EdTPA. So I will absolutely pass those along.
Thank you. And then finally, the last one, quick one. And on the others, we heard a discussion of the rates of error code submissions, and I didn't hear that about this one.
You certainly can.
So just a little bit of background on that. So we had sent out a couple of different data requests, and since things were reported differently, FAST, Cal TPA, Ed TPA were in different states of having it on the ready or needing additional time. Ed TPA needed a little bit more time, but Lori's already committed to giving us a kind of full look at the condition codes by our next meeting.
Yeah, absolutely.
Thank you.
Yes, you're very welcome. Yeah, thank you. I meant to tell you all that, and I'm sorry. I neglected to say that. But yeah, I will absolutely. I'll have that to Adam again in time for your next meeting.
Yeah. Other questions?
You mentioned earlier about the literacy work that's happening in your modify the TPA. Is that happening, or is it happening yet that there is a new assessment that incorporates the current legislation in California? And yeah, thank you for the question. Absolutely. So yes, Ed TPA is just like the Cal TPA has the LTPA now. So Ed TPA will be taking 2 of the handbooks, the one for Ed Specialist and one of the handbooks. There are currently 2 approved handbooks for multiple subjects. One of them is literacy with kind of a 4th task in mathematics. The other one is mathematics with a 4th task in literacy. That one will have to be unapproved. That one won't work because it's not possible in that small 4th task to embed the richness that needs to be included. So we will be bringing at the December meeting a full request with all of that. So yeah, thank you for the question, for sure.
May I add one thing?
Of
Sorry.
course.
This is just to kind of keep track on the flow of documents that have been coming in. So you'll notice on item 2A of this meeting, there is an updated resource guide. And so we have shared the handbook that includes the, if I get this right, 3 Math, 1 Literacy, right? Yeah.
Say that one more time.
The handbook that includes the 3 Math, 1 Literacy task.
That's the one that will no longer work for July 1.
Yes.
And this is the one that is approved.
It is approved currently. Yes, it is currently approved. Candidates are currently using it. But there are 2. There's the literacy with math as task 4, and that's the one that we are working.
So if you wanted to review it, that's available on item 2A of this.
Yeah, thank you. I was maybe picking up on that one. So one of the discussions we've had here with is formative in nature is the importance of feedback and targeted feedback that moves learning forward in particular. And I think that probably is even more important if we move to a modular approach. I don't know if that's the right described it, but so I guess I was hoping you could say a little bit more about the feedback that candidates get and how that, in your mind anyways, or how you're envisioning that moving the learning forward for candidates.
Yeah.
I'm not, sorry, to be clear, I'm not talking about the rubrics. I'm talking about the actual comments, feedback, suggestions that the candidates.
Yeah, so on their score report, it's multiple pages. Candidates have the first page, page and a half is their actual rubric scores, right? So it just has their rubric scores. Beyond that, if they continue to scroll, and they don't always, right? They see a number and they're like, I passed, I'm done, or I didn't, and they close the document. What they see are performance descriptions. They actually are receiving a description of a statement of why they scored that particular way. So if they scored at a level 3, there's a statement that talks about why they scored at a level 3 versus at a level 2 or at a level 4. So they're receiving performance description. I'm just going to address kind of the elephant in the room. Is it completely specific to each and every candidate? It's not. I mean, think about how to give valid and reliable individual feedback written by lots of different scorers to different candidates is a process that I won't even try to untangle today. But it is feedback. There are lots of different comments within the system that a scorer can tag and say, this is why this met the threshold of a level 4, a level 5, or whatever it is. So they are receiving that. If they do receive a condition code, we actually took an opportunity about 2 years ago to really revamp our condition codes. I think we scared the field because we added a bunch of condition codes. We were not adding more ways to ding a candidate for something unscorable. We actually took some of them that were somewhat vague, like missing commentary. Well, they can't access their portfolio once they submit. So they didn't know which commentary was missing. And then it meant they had to call the customer contact center and they had to wait for a response. And it was just this unnecessary burden. And so what we did was we actually unpacked some of those condition codes, creating a longer list, but a more clearly defined. And so if they do get a condition code, it would say instruction commentary was left blank, right? So that they have that kind of knowledge, just so that when they're ready to resubmit, they know what they need to resubmit. They're not guessing.
If I may, just one more. So do you imagine feedback changing if you were to go to a modular approach? Would it be the same that is as you just described?
I think so it's a great question. So the way to give feedback, I think, would be similar. What I would like to see is candidates being, I'm going to say, we also have a retake webinar. So let me kind of say that. And what I would like to do in a modular submission is be able to have a webinar, a candidate webinar that says, how do you use your scores from the first submission to inform what you need to do next time? So in that sense, formative in that we have an opportunity to teach candidates, how do you use a score report? How do you use what you got back to inform what you need to do next?
Benjamin.
Something you just said, I had a question about. So candidates hit submit and they no longer have access to what they submitted. Why?
So part of it is just security, so that they can't go back in and make changes to anything, right, before that happens. It's the same with the counts, but they just can't go back in. It's the way the system is kind of locks their submission so that nothing can be edited or changed afterwards. We do have, at no cost, we have relationships with third-party vendors, third-party assessment systems, things like, and some of you might know what I'm talking about, TK20, Anthology, TaskStream. And what candidates often will do, programs will use those as an assessment management system for their campus or for their program. Candidates will build their artifacts in there and then they submit them through there. So that's how EPPs can retain a copy and can see what their candidates have submitted. It's not something that we haven't talked about, right? Is there a way to lock the system so that candidates can view it? It's not something that has gone untalked about. I will say that for sure.
Thank you, Linda.
Yes, so my question for you, or a comment, I don't know, whatever you want to call it. For formative, you mentioned several times that your rubric is formative, being that it's different, it's leveled. But my question is, this is a test that determines whether you get your credentials. No one wants to be formative. If they're getting a 2 on your rubric, there's not really a feedback opportunity to move up that rubric. A 2 is still a non-passing score. So how is your rubric formative then if a 2 is a 2 and it's a not passing 2?
Yeah, that's another good question. Thank you. So I'll say that on EdTPA, the score, the total passing score is set by the state. So the commission has set the total passing score, but there's no requirement that a candidate can't earn a 2 on some rubrics. It's compensatory. They might earn once. I've seen candidates earn 1s and then really knock it out of the park on other rubrics because they're just very well prepared in another area. And maybe this area, they're just still learning and developing and growing as an educator. And so it is compensatory. They do have an opportunity to, to reach that level of proficiency, even if they do score below proficiency on a particular rubric. The other thing, and I'm going to write myself a note so I don't forget to send this. You're going to get an email. It's going to have to be multiple emails because all this won't be attached as one. I'm going to get a kickback. Microsoft's going to tell me, no, it's too much. The other thing that we do have that makes our rubrics formative, we have what we call understanding rubric level progressions. That's a mouthful. We call it the URLP. It used to, when I first started working with EdTPA 11 years ago, it was a scorer only document. Only scorers had it. It was then made public. It's probably the closest thing to an answer key that you could get. What it does is it actually, for every single rubric, it defines all the key terms. It describes any automatic one criteria. So if a candidate they're teaching incorrect content, that's an automatic one, right? That's, you're not ready yet to teach if that. So there's things like that. But the real meat of that URLP is that it actually defines performance at a level 3. So it unpacks in more than just the rubric language. It unpacks what is performance at a level 3, what is performance below a level 3, above a level 3, and then it actually defines and describes the difference between a 1 and a 2, a 2, a 3, a 3, a 4, a 4, a 5. So if I have failed, if I've taken my TPA, I failed, I look at some of my rubrics, I see I was getting 2s on a lot of these rubrics. What am I gonna, like, I don't know what to do. This one little sentence or 2 sentences on my rubric doesn't tell me what I need to do differently. The URLP is there, and candidates have access to that when they first register. It is part of what this fall we are embedding into the handbooks, because from personal experience, from experience working with EdTPA coordinators, I can tell you that candidates don't make robust enough use of the URLP. So we're popping it right into the handbook so that they can actually see it with each one. So that formative piece, if they don't meet the passing standard, they need to retake EdTPA. They do have a way to unpack what it means to have scored a 2 and what do I need to do different in order to get myself to that level 3.
Thank you, Talia.
It was along the same lines. So with this new modular submission model, do you envision it being sort of linear in terms of, like, you said 1 was planning, 2 instruction and 3 assessment, or would it be like the national board is, where you get to decide which component you submit in any order that you want?
Yeah.
For that.
So it's not developed yet. I actually think that what we'll probably see is 2 tasks. So a combination of and then splitting of tasks 1, 2, and 3. So not 3 separate submissions, but I actually think it'll be 2 tasks. So kind of combining everything and then splitting it appropriately into 2 tasks. They would not be connected. So candidates could choose whichever one they wanted to do first. So if they had, a particular unit or lessons early in their placement, maybe fit kind of task 2, they could do that one first versus task 1.
And sorry, the second one was because then you mentioned that with this new model, it could be formative in that students would get feedback and then be able to use it on their next submission. And so how do you envision that working? If they're not necessarily connected, but they are connected to the person and their practice, but how would that look?
Yeah, I think the feedback is connected to the process, right? To what have they done? Are there reflections? Is there evidence? Is there artifact? Where can they, where are tangible things that they can be kind of directed to in order to help them think about what they can do differently next time? Of course, if it's 2 different groups of students, or if they're working, 1 in literacy and 1 in math, that, content specific feedback won't necessarily be helpful, but really the process and the procedure feedback. I think there's an opportunity there to help candidates really understand that. And then, like I said, I think, candidates, if you fail, that's an emotional roller coaster you need to navigate first before you're ready to kind of get back in and start the work of resubmitting. Candidates need to process that first, right? And really think about that. And so I think having, when we move to that modular submission, being able to think through a webinar that would help candidates really unpack their score report and really think about what does the feedback mean and how can I use that to make decisions that would be supportive of the next one. I think we have an opportunity there.
You, Beverly.
I'm thinking and rethinking more about this concept of formative, and I think and maybe all of us are thinking a lot about formative in terms of it needs to inform the pre-service program and while they're learning and getting their credential, because of course we see it as an endpoint and at a decision point of the credential. I'm also thinking about formative in terms of the original goals when 2042 put this into place about formative for the life of a teacher's development, that a teacher isn't done learning and growing once they receive their credential, but it's meant, as this goal here says, to inform induction also. If you think about formative feedback, not just getting their credential, but formative feedback for the life of a teacher, so that if it truly does have a connection to induction, then the feedback that comes at that point would be formative in nature, because it should inform what they do in their next years and how they work toward their clear credential and how they structure their growth. And so I think that's a really important part, a link that needs to be made, that formative piece. But I don't want to neglect the formative piece that goes back, recycles into teacher preparation. So I think we want to think about formative more broadly and ensure that it's to both sections, if you will, of a teacher learning, that pre-service before teacher of record, but also as they move on into becoming a beginning teacher, a more experienced teacher throughout their career, that it's formative.
If I can push back on that a little bit though. So it should be, if it's going to inform my practice as a teacher candidate, it should be motivating me to learn and to grow. That doesn't bear out in the comments. It's stressful. It's a negative identity affirming. There's all kinds of things that's suggesting that in theory, yes, but in practice, not so much. So.
Right. And I think that's our charge, is to look back at the theory and see how in practice we've gotten away from what we intended.
I have a quick point, Devin, and it is, for the CTA survey, was that only on TPA or was it in of Ed TPA and FAST?
Every teacher, the survey that the commission, the survey that the commission issues is on every application for preliminary credentials.
I was speaking of the CTA survey.
Oh, CTA, I'm so sorry.
The CTA survey was about half and half. The fast responses were small. We can reach out to them and get more information.
That would be great.
But as I understand, just sort of looking back at it's 50-50 around there with Cal TPA and TPA, relatively even.
Do we have those responses broken down by ethnic groups?
They're broken down in the table, appendix and indices. They're broken down by.
Yeah.
I had a quick question on the rubric. In developing the rubric, how did you come to the headings? And is there any consideration for changing, modifying, or removing those? For example, a score of 5 is considered highly accomplished. Is that realistic for a credential candidate to obtain status of highly accomplished in a particular area?
Yeah, those headings that you saw are not actually on the rubrics themselves. That's really, so candidates don't see that language. It's really just how we are, language I'm using to share with you kind of the range from not ready to accomplished or highly accomplished beginning teacher. But candidates don't see that language. We sort of reserve that for, yeah.
Are your feedback or the comments for feedback, is it just a drop-down menu that the assessors use?
Just like, yes, yeah. So it's same thing with Cal TPA. It's like a drop-down menu, but there's options that they can select that this is what the evidence for this rubric, this is why it met this particular level of the rubric 1 through 5.
Kathleen, Josh.
Oh, yeah, I would just like to remind our chairs that I waved my flag like twice and you decided to go around the room before you got to me. So, so I appreciate you advocating for your fellow member. To go back to something that you said, but thank you for bringing up the rubric again, because you had mentioned, and I want some clarification, that you said that you could score a number of 1s on a rubric, but then score a number of 5s on the rubric and still pass the TPA.
Yeah, so I think it's relatively uncommon to see 1s and 5s. I was sort of using that as an example.
Yeah.
There is for the 15 rubric handbooks. That's most of the handbooks. It's all of the single subject handbooks or 15 rubric handbooks times 5 points for each rubric, total score of 75. The commission has set the passing standard at a 41. So if you do that math, that's not scoring a 3 on every rubric. So that's allowing candidates who are still growing and developing and acknowledging the continuum of growth. It doesn't stop the day we complete our Ed TPA or any performance assessment. It doesn't stop the day we walk at graduation or the day that the commission earns, gives us that we get our credential, that it continues, right? That we're continuing. So that's why that rationale for not setting a passing standard that everybody has to have a 3 on every single rubric, but acknowledging that there are candidates who are going to be more prepared in some areas and less prepared in other areas, and allowing it to be compensatory. So do I see portfolios that are 1s and 5s? Not very often. It's really more the 2s and 3s and 4s. It's kind of in that space that we see kind of that variability across the 15 rubrics.
So my comment would be, I would be concerned about the validity of an assessment that would allow a teacher to come through with, if there was even a possibility to come in with a bunch of 1s and a bunch of 5s, because I'm not sure how they would have gotten there. But if there's a possibility for that to happen, I would question the validity of that. And then in those specific cases where you see these 1s and see these 5s, is there anything that Ed TPA does to follow up with that specific candidate or that specific program to figure out why such an aberration would happen?
We don't reach out to candidates directly. We don't provide support as the vendor to particular candidates. We do reach out to EPPs. So as we are looking at data, if we see patterns of data, if EPPs see patterns of data, they'll reach out to us. But we certainly, as we are looking at data, if we see that EPPs have particular patterns of data, we absolutely have reached out around low performance in particular content areas. And condition codes. We've offered EPPs support. Like, let's talk about, because condition codes are entirely avoidable. And so that's what I want to do, is help candidates avoid having to retake because of a condition code, right? That's no fun for anybody. And so we have reached out to EPPs, yes, to say, we're recognizing that you have a pattern. Let's talk about what you could do to support your candidates better. What messaging can you send? We've done that, yeah, for sure.
My apologies, Josh.
That's okay.
Can I add just one data point for Cal TPA related to the scoring of 1? We have a scoring expectation. I'm looking at Amy for nods that the signal was 1, where you can achieve no more than 1 score of 1 on each cycle. In order to get to the passing standard.
Specific for Cal TPA.
For Cal TPA, all forms of Cal TPA, no more than 1 score of 1 on a 7 rubric cycle and an 8 rubric cycle. 1 on each is the maximum. So just so you know.
Kathleen? No. All right, Alicia.
I wanted to swing back to Devin, because you had made a comment, you said about the 5 and what was it being accomplished? Yeah, and I was just thinking about that. So, I was thinking about that, and they don't see that. That's just for the assessors, right?
The assessors don't even see that language anyhow. It's really just language that when we're talking about the rubrics on Ed TPA for you, right? To see what is the progression that 3 is proficient and 1 is not quite ready and 5 is the indicative of someone who's highly accomplished, not across the board, but in that context.
If you wonder what do they see, because I was thinking about it in terms of messaging, right? So if we're thinking about these things as being formative, it's like if the assessors or even we we're talking about it in this way, in this very finite summative way. That's how we're seeing it. And that's the framework and the lens through which we're thinking about it, right? And so that's a frame, right?
In the handbooks that you have access to, the rubrics are embedded in them. So you'll be able to see.
Right. So then if we're thinking about, you know what I mean? So if we're thinking about that in that way, then that changes how you know, it just isn't, that isn't like a formative, developing, like beginning, growing, like that isn't the same frame, right? So I'm just thinking about that, you know, the difference in sort of framing, you know, like whether the candidate sees it or they don't see it, it's happening, right? And whether we say it or don't say it, that's what's happening, you know? Sounds like, we're saying it right now, you know, we're doing it right now, right? Absolutely.
Thank you. Talia.
Yeah, just, you know, I did the TPA and then national board. And to be honest, I did what you did. I did what you said with the TPA. I saw my score, I passed and I moved on, you know, but when I did national board, that was a process that really required me reflective because it wasn't the first time, right? You don't usually get things the first time. And so those drop down comments were super difficult. So I was trying to imagine, like, if I was a, you know, student teacher and I got my scores and I got a drop down little menu with a very vague comment, I don't know what I would have done. Because even through the national board process, I had a program to help me understand what that vague comment meant. So I cannot imagine the pre-service teachers getting a drop down menu vague comment, like, you know, you didn't meet whatever it was, and trying to figure that out when they're outside of their teacher ed program and have very little to no support. You know, so I feel like there's that group that we keep talking about who we don't have access to anymore because they're done with their teacher ed program, but they get these scores and then they're left to figure out and disseminate this vague comment on their own. So I don't know if there's any like steps to be done to maybe do some targeted focus on maybe some of the more common codes that are coming up, right? So maybe if you all have that to be like, you know what, they seem to not be getting the 3 because of this code. Maybe we'll do a targeted, you know, webinar or instruction to help these students out.
It does. I like that idea. As you were talking, I was thinking there's certainly an opportunity as the assessment is looked at, right? To say, what can we point them to? So if they get condition codes on their rubrics, their performance descriptor says what they did, right? Missing commentary. And then we actually have a link right on there that takes them to a web page that tells them exactly what they need to do differently. And there might be an opportunity to look at if they get a level 3, is there a way to take them to a place where there can be more information? We're sort of bound by a finite number of characters on a score report. So robust, paragraph of information is probably not possible. But I think you've kind of given me something to think about in terms of, is there a way to take what we've done for condition codes and apply it to levels 1, 2, 3, 4, 5? That in general, if you've scored at a level 1, look at these things. If you've scored at a level 2, think about these things, 3, 4, and 5. So thank you. That's, you've given me something to think about this week. Thank you.
Nessa, could you talk to us a little bit about what the process is like when a candidate wants to submit the practice assessments? You mentioned something that they could submit before their final submission for some feedback. Could you talk about what that feedback would look like? Is it the same as the final submission, or what does that practice look like?
Absolutely. So the form, that's the faculty feedback tool. And the feedback is by faculty and staff. It's not by Pearson. It's not by scorers. It goes straight to their faculty or their staff. So they're, the supervisor, whoever the EPP has designated as, these are the people who will give feedback. Candidates can upload one artifact. They can upload every artifact. They can put it all in the system. The system then sends an email, and then they select their evaluator or their person, right, who's going to give them feedback. They select that person. That person then receives an email with a link to the system and a code to get in and all of the things. And then what they can do is go into the system. They can view what the candidate has submitted, and they can leave feedback right on it. So they can annotate within documents, within videos, but they can provide feedback. Maybe they want to say, is this the best way to teach this content to these kiddos? Whatever feedback they want to give them, right? They can provide them with that feedback, with that guidance. Then candidates can, and again, this can be iterative. They can do this. We have some EPPs that, they'll say, we're going to review one task, or we're going to review a lot of EPPs who use this will say, we looked at our data and task 3 is our lowest performing task. So we're using the faculty feedback tool only for task 3, because in the main, our candidates are doing really well on 1 and 2. So we're going to have every candidate submit their evidence for task 3. We're going to look at that, provide them with feedback, and then candidates can take that feedback to then make those modifications to their assessment, to their artifacts.
There a limited amount of times they can submit, and in what you're saying, it's not the drop down comments.
No, so on the faculty feedback tool, that it can be iterative as many times as faculty have time and space to do that work. So it can absolutely be iterative, and it's not drop down. It's the actual like annotated feedback directly from their mentor, their coach, their EPP.
The faculty is tied to their EPP.
Correct. It's their own faculty and staff from their EPP who know them, know the local context, know the classroom. If it's a supervisor, they've probably been in the classroom. So they have all that local context. Yeah. So that's that faculty feedback tool. The actual full submission, faculty they're not in that part of the platform. Bifurcated, so they're over here.
Any other?
Just had her hand up for a while.
Oh my goodness, Tina, I am so sorry. I apologize. It's the post-lunch. Go ahead, Tina.
No worries at all. I've been reflecting as I've been listening here. I know the TPA pretty well, and so I was having an opportunity to sort of think about all that we've heard today from the different model sponsors. And I've been in this work since for a very long time, almost as long as Beverly. And TPA came out of the PAC, the Performance Assessment for California Teachers, and that assessment was created by faculty for our programs, for our state, very similar to what we heard today about FAST. And one of the things that strikes me, and one of the things that we know, is when we as a state moved from our own faculty and teacher educators and ideally mentor teacher scoring, the candidates work within their programs to a centralized scoring model. We lost a lot of really good work and good opportunities. And when you compare FAST to Cal TPA and Ed TPA, one of the things that I've noticed is we're seeing the FAST faculty more engaged, is my understanding. We're seeing their cooperating teachers and others engaged. We're seeing them doing retreats at the beginning and the end of programs to look at data. We're seeing everybody scoring. In our assessment standards and in our program standards, there's a requirement that our program sponsors provide that information so that faculty learn everything. And programs are supposed to provide opportunities for all the faculty working with candidates to learn everything. But in my experience, that's become pretty superficial. It wasn't like the days when all of the teacher educators in the program that I ran were responsible for scoring. And they were responsible for really understanding the rubric language and the progression of the rubrics. And the point about the rubrics is a really important one, I think, because Lori, when you said that the understanding the rubric level progression is now available to candidates and faculty, I so applaud that, because I remember as a scorer how well I got to really understand the theory behind what we think of, at least with Ed TPA and with PACT, what we think a developing teacher in these different constructs and dimensions should look like in the state of California. And if we believe in that, if we all believe in that, then I don't see any harm in the so-called teaching to the test. But if we leave the understanding the rubric level progression to be read by faculty and read by candidates, and as they're doing just this one task, then it becomes a very big burden as opposed to something that's really well integrated in their programs, like I understand FAST to be. All of this, and I apologize for it being such a long comment, but it's pointing me back to the necessity for local scoring in some way, shape, or form. We have that provision in our standards. Model sponsors are supposed to support programs who want to do that, but I don't think a lot of programs take advantage of that. Lori, are there any programs in California that do that with EdTPA?
No, there are not.
And you have there's a whole lot in the assessment standards for what you are supposed to do as a model sponsor to support programs, right?
Yes.
And do you have something, do all the models, not FAST, but CalTPA and EdTPA, do you have something that you can share with us about the kinds of supports you provide and what the whole local scoring could look like?
I can put something together for the group, absolutely.
I just believe that one of the things that's happened to us in this state is, again, too many of the teacher educators have become too separated from the actual work of what candidates are doing, as well as the ability to, I hate the word buy into, but the ability to take the rubrics and the tasks and the work and say, this is good work, and I would like to integrate this into my practice in this particular ways, and let's look at a program, how we do it and why we do it and what's important about it. And there used to be more adaptability around that. And then we used to, I think, get a lot more out of it because so many more faculty were looking at candidate evidence and candidate work vis-a-vis rubrics that we understood and believed in.
Well said, team. Any other comments? We will now open for public comment. If there are members of the public that would like to make a comment, please notify the meeting moderator by submitting a request card or by clicking on the raised hand icon if participating through Zoom, or pressing *9 if participating by phone. Public comment is limited to 2 minutes per speaker. Recording secretary, are there any public comments?
No public.
The public comment period for this item is now closed. We've already covered questions, so thank you very much. That concludes your presentation.
Thank you.
We'll pass it on to our co-chair for item 3B.
So we want to talk quickly about a modification that we are making to the agenda in lieu of time. 3B is performance assessment improvement opportunities. And then 4B is supposed to be the performance assessment improvement opportunity. Fantastic. So that, and here's reframing how we'd like to do the work for the next 20 minutes. We'd like to get an initial brainstorm of your ideas of how to improve the tool itself. So we're not talking about the entirety of the process, not accreditation, not how to embed. Those pieces come later. But looking today at the actual tools, obviously we have our 3 tools. What can we do to improve those specific tools? And you could approach it either way. You could look at an individual tool. You can look at across the board. Either feedback is welcome. And what we would like to do is take about 10 minutes and do an elbow partner activity where you brainstorm with the person next to you. And then after 10 minutes, we're going to go around the room and share out 2, but that doesn't mean that's all you can have. But that'll be the 2 that we record today. And then we're going to welcome and ask that you provide more and send those to Adam. And he will create a document with all of your feedback. At our next meeting, we're going to pass out consensus cards and have you kind of say, yeah, I feel good about this. I don't feel good about this one. And start to get a feel of what recommendations we might take And this is an iterative process where we'll start to say, am I comfortable with this potential recommendation? Am I not comfortable? Should I add it to the list to keep it going? And it'll continue to lengthen over the next couple of sessions. So, but this one in particular, we're looking at the performance tool itself. Does that make sense?
Not the process, the tool.
Okay. So not the process, but the tool.
Give us an example, just for the sake of clarity.
So the tool should, instead of being a rubric based, should provide specific feedback to the candidate. Would be like a specific to the actual assessment tool.
That help? Does that help? Any questions about the task?
Linda?
Sorry, when you say tool, you're talking about the TPA, Cal TPA, and the.
Yes.
Okay,
The
thank you.
3 TPAs
Got it, thank you.
that are currently being used. So 10 minutes to do kind of a discussion with your partner, then we'll go around the table twice. And we'll capture those today, but that doesn't limit what else you can send to Adam.
I think when I was doing the math, it seemed like.
She does, yeah, she's gonna come back, so.
First one is just a permanent.
Okay.
And sharing out.
Well, I have a course now where I'm required
to try.
But to be fair, like we can provide feedback. So far I got.
Okay, so here's what we'd like to do. As soon as Adam is prepared at his computer, we are going to.
You
have to, it's true.
And then I'll just.
Okay. So here's what we'd like to do. Completely free of judgment, placing ideas and brainstorming ideas out onto the table. Might be a new idea. We may flesh it out later and it may not work. But just to start getting ideas out there, we'd like to start, yes.
May I just ask, please, so speak clearly and loudly. So what I'm gonna do is, I'm gonna take the video, I'll strip out the audio, I'll run it through RDI, and I'll send you the text transcript where you can click on the word and it'll pick up with the audio. So you can listen, read, go through at 1.5 speed, which is always fun.
Perfect. And we're gonna start with Joshua, if you don't mind, and then we'll go around the room. You are not obligated to come up with a unique idea. So if someone has said something similar to your idea, just go ahead and repeat it. And we'll start with Joshua and just go straight around the room and then go back around again.
So you say
The two of you together.
Okay.
No. Oh, great.
Yes.
Okay. So we found that FAST was really promising, and we really encourage, and our hope is that if there's a potential for the different varieties to return to localized scoring, that we would encourage that. So that's number one. We would also posit, and just because we just witnessed TPA, this came to mind really quickly, that 15 different rubrics with 5 criteria, so 75 total iterations of what could happen. It takes you into an impossible, and we would say unreasonable multiverse, right? And so that may need to be refined or reworded or made more accessible, because 75 different iterations of what could happen, we found unreasonable for an early career teacher.
My one, I'm sorry to go on about the same sort of thing, but I think whatever it is, there has to be accountability when there are discrepancies in success rates, particularly by ethnicity. This has been going on for like 5 years. If you looked at the data, I think both speakers really didn't answer the question. It's more like, we're going to talk about it some more. But they've been seeing that data for 5 years, and I think that there needs to be some accountability, and it needs to be published and go out to programs and the state and whatever.
And then with that, so one kind of lives within another, but so when I was reading all the comments, because I actually went through each of the comments for all the different surveys, and when I was reading it, one major theme other than stressed and overwhelmed was confused or not clear, was like a major theme I saw cropping up. And so to me, I think the condition codes information we saw a little bit earlier might reinforce that where we had 14% in one cycle of people in 1 year receiving a condition code. It's a little bit alarming, especially if they're paying $150 to $300 per pop. And I definitely recognize that one of the things programs are asked for is how can we support candidates that may or may not and take that fiscal burden away. And it's something that our program is doing. Like, please retake that class, it's free. You already paid once, why pay again, right? It's just interesting to me that then candidates might have to, through the system, go in and pay for a resubmission on a condition code. So to me, it's the idea of clarity and also this look at like condition codes and how we got to this place where over 1 out of 10 people are being condition coded out per year.
Kind of going off of what Ben just said, I think what we discussed is one of the things that we found really beneficial and fast is that, and all tools should have this, is orientations for all of the EPPs and the candidates, so they can go over the condition codes and the rubrics and things like that. But all participants within the EPP and candidates should have an orientation for whichever tool that they're going to use.
The other thing we talked about, we know that Cal TPA offers this. I didn't hear it in Ed TPA, and I know FAST doesn't offer it the option to video or audio record the commentary. That's
Yeah, I would like to build off of that and just talk about even just within the instructions, having multiple modalities for understanding rubrics or multi-universes or all that jazz.
Just add real quick, looking for like accessible online platforms. So going back to the feedback, a lot of people had a hard time loading. It wasn't loading. Maybe some webinars, maybe more like YouTube. Someone mentioned YouTube videos out there, just a real quick 1 minute, or make sure you do it this way. Make sure this volume checked here. And I know that might be difficult, but just again, looking at accessible online platforms that are consistent and just understanding like bandwidth. Like I know personally coming from the Central Valley, you may not have bandwidth when you're way out there in the middle of nowhere at some school that barely can get the Wi-Fi tower near them. So do want to have that.
We've talked about a lot of our issues being more related to implementation than the actual tool. But one of my things is related to condition codes also, in that retriggering, paying the fee again, if it were possible for exams that were rejected for condition code, instead of going back and having to repay again, their local scored. And so then the institution, sort of as a consequence of maybe not preparing their people well enough and having that, but also it would eliminate that double payment for the candidate. And
I would add to that, just any second submission being covered, rather whether it's a condition code or just a low score. If they have to resubmit, cover that. But another one, we talked about several, another one was just minimizing some of the rubric criteria. Just like it was mentioned earlier, it's so broad and so general, and just really struggle with trying to really do what's required based on that rubric. It's constricting.
We only do one.
well, we were here.
Super partners.
Partner.
No.
We started, well, we talked about the accountability for the programs in terms of how they support the candidates and what are they doing specifically. And I couldn't, my brain is mush and it's probably around somewhere, but specific language in the standards that talk about what programs are supposed to do. They asked programs in the standards, hey, what are you doing to support candidates through your TPA? But it stops short of asking them and mandating them to do it.
Yeah, and that came about because I was asking for the tool itself, could it require candidates to give even like a support summary while I'm doing the task? This is the support that I received for this particular task. The other thought that I had was trying to address the intrinsic motivation when you're taking the test, because I'm doing this because it's a hurdle and I have to jump through the hoop, in a series of hoops. But I know that oftentimes if I self-assess first, so if I'm looking at the rubric, I'm thinking prior to the task, this is where I think I stand. I then do the task, and then after, I think this is where I fall on the rubric. It comes a little bit more intrinsic because I'm grading myself before you grade me. So how could that be embedded within?
I think I got elected to speak for the three of us. One is that it would be an iterative tool, so there would be multiple rounds that would have asset-based feedback. And the feedback would include guidance for next steps for candidates at all levels. It's not just, this is what you do to improve to the next level, but your growth as a educator. And along those lines, that it would also include a component where we're assessing for, or including professional growth opportunities where we're looking for that application of feedback with the assessment. And finally, I'd say that it takes into account that we're not just talking, anymore about English learners, but we're talking about multilingual learners.
Yeah. So I did want to add one thing, which is we did talk also about that accountability piece, which was like, or I did, just like brought up that I just wanted that, I wanted that responsibility moved or made explicit for programs, you know, so built in so that it was gonna happen.
I am reading off what Talia said. This does not count as R2. Okay. Her comment is, if they are formative in nature, they should be free and all pass. That's her comment.
It should what?
It should be free and all should pass.
Oh, I see.
Thank you. Okay, and then Shayna's gonna represent us. I'll try to read. Oh, look, you're reading my notes. Ours were already said.
That's okay. Say it
Yes.
again.
Say it again. Okay, we talked about having multiple ways to submit, so like a video or audio in addition to the option of writing. We also talked about submitting in parts and having different tasks or different opportunities to go move towards that more formative nature. Those are two.
Yeah, well, and I wanted to add, we also talked about just, I think what everyone said about local scoring. And that was just huge. And Shayna shared that like when she used to do local scoring in her university, that it was that people, like Tina said, that people really knew the language, knew the rubric, knew what to do to, you know, support. And I think that's what we're seeing with Fresno's FAST is that because they score, they do it, they know exactly what they want from their candidates and how to move them forward into a 99.9% passing rate with counseling at the end for the non-passers. I think that's beautiful. That's ideal. But then again, we looked at, can all programs do it? I know Vanessa had alluded to, can we do this at a local level with every program? And, you know, Sheena said at my program now, it's going to cost money. And then when we talk about money, then we're talking about equity issues, you know, so then that opens up that can of worms. So.
Sure. So first and foremost, we want to ensure that there are no fees for whatever instrument we select. And that was based on Talia's today. And then in addition to that, in order to ensure that the assessment is indeed formative, we would like to exercise a local scoring option.
Tina, do you have something to add to recommendations brainstorm list?
Oh, thank you. I brainstormed myself. I was thinking that maybe we have to focus on the prep program dash assessment as the unit of analysis or as the unit for improvement, instead of saying we need to improve the assessment and we need to improve what programs are doing. But how do we look at that unit together? And then the second thing is that somehow I think we need to make part of the TPA more adaptable to a program. Not exactly sure what that would look like, but there needs to be some adaptability that programs can own and take and make their own.
Rebecca?
I'm really thinking about considering the TPA and the ILP or the induction plan on that, connecting that continuum and seeing how the TPA can actually be useful in my actual teaching practice. So examining the requirements to make sure that that they are natural behaviors that we want teachers to practice all the time. so that this isn't an exercise in a dog and pony show, but actually supported practice and behaviors that will make you successful in your career. Make sense? That's what I'm thinking about.
So this list will be available post-meeting. What we encourage you to do is review it. Consider what other things you would like to put on it. The list can be as extensive as we would like it to be. And this will become our initial recommendation going forward. And at the next meeting, you'll have the opportunity to kind of take a poll on how we're feeling about each one. Sometimes we might take things off and then add others, and we'll do that at the beginning and end of each meeting going forward. Okay.
Just to clarify, so the other points that we came up in our group, we should email those to Adam. We'll add those to the list that he's stripping out of the audio. Okay.
Correct. Yep.
So is your list going to be tools and then process, or is it going to be combined?
Right now, it seems like it's combined. And we'll need to delineate those as we go along, but let's use this as a good place to start. Okay. We will now open for public comment for item 3B. Are there any public comments? So we are skipping 4B because we're going to take that into next meeting due to the time.
5B, all right. Next is item 5B, general public comment. We will now open for public comment. Recording secretary, are there any public comments?
We have no public.
The public comment period for this item is now closed.
So we're moving to item 6B, which is our day 2 closing. Before we ask our staff for closing remarks, I would like you to be aware our next meeting is currently scheduled for November 5th and 6th, which happens to be election day and the post day. We are going to send a poll to everyone that will include keep it on the 5th and 6th, or move it to the 6th and 7th, or move it to the 7th and 8th. So those are going to be the 3 options. We encourage you to please check your CTC email and respond. We want to ensure that everyone is able to come to the meeting. So please respond as quickly as possible. And with that, are there any closing remarks?
First of all, I just want to extend my gratitude to the staff that make such meetings happen. I know a tremendous amount of time and effort goes into all the things to make this work happen. And I know there's a lot of staff somewhere else in this building and maybe at home, like the tech support. We see you, we appreciate you, thank you. Our co-chairs, thank you for stepping up and doing a lot of work behind the scenes to put together the agenda and keep us moving in a forward direction. Also, I want to thank the assessment model presenters. Yay, thank you so much. All understand the 3 models that we have in our state. Shout out to the public people. We have people sitting in the room all 2 days. Thank you. We see you. Thank you for part of the work. And lastly, the work group members. I know we have some on Zoom. Thank you to the people in the room. Thank you to the people on the Zoom. I just can't say how blown away I am by your thoughtfulness, your dedication to the work. And I was sitting here really trying to take some notes because this Thursday and Friday is our next commission meeting. That meeting I'll be sharing out as the liaison about the work. And as I was reflecting on that, since our previous meeting, at the August commission meeting, that's the meeting where we voted and said, hey, we think we should have this work group and these people would be amazing. And this is our next meeting. And between those 2 meetings, we have met twice for 4 days and had some really deep discussions. And I want to just really thank you for your openness and your commitment to potentially amazing transformative impact on people who are considering being educators. So I'm really grateful and I'm excited to share this Thursday and Friday about your work. And I'm excited to see where it's going to go next. Thank you.
barely think of anything else to say. Thank you, Commissioner Brown. Echo everything. And I want to say I'm impressed with your ability to direct, because that's what we did at this meeting. And that, you know, all of this is going to be iterative, and thank you again for saying yes to this. This is very powerful.
I'm just so convinced that we have the right people in the room to innovative ideas and send them forward. That has been reaffirmed first time, second time, and your perseverance as we navigate blinding sunlight coming in that way, Wi-Fi dropping, going to hotspots that then dropped, going to a flotilla of private phones, keeping a meeting going in Bagley Keene. I mean, it's in an 80-degree room. I mean, that's quite a set of circumstances to persevere through and get to the point where you're able to go around the table and speak into the record a series of recommendations that would have real changes, would affect really real changes for people that have raised their hand and said, I want to be a teacher, and I'm going to do it. So just thank you, and thank you for your patience. And I'm just looking forward to sending you more resources in the interim. And so apologies for that. But yeah, I thank you. That's it.
We're gonna go to the order based on previous experience. If it's okay with staff, we can leave our binders here and not carry them back and forth each time. And I would suggest, if you're gonna do so, take your name tag, stick it in the cover, so you know which one is yours next time.
Yes. Your binders, if you want your binder to live in the Delta conference room, you're more than well. I will put it in the cart, and I will take it right back upstairs. It will have a home. And then what we'll do is we'll make sure that your resources next time are just 3-hole punched and ready to go. And binder will grow. The binder shall grow.
On behalf of Ursula and I, thank you for your commitment and for being here today. And with that, we adjourn the October 2024 RDI TPA Workgroup meeting. Our next meeting is TBD, but will be the week of November 5th, and respond to that quickly so we can set those dates in motion. That would be great. Thank you, everyone.